Still picking up a few tail ends here and there from previous tapings. And to be more specific, even from the very last one, as you'll see in a second, those of you who were here are privy to it. Consider this, how absolutely mystified psychology, for instance, but humanity has been, but let's bring it up to date and fairly scientifically speaking, but how absolutely mystified psychology and common sense, but psychology is over the fact of how lovers and kin are so continually aggressive to one another. I guess you can fill in some of the porous areas there, can't you? Not just psychology, because this is not really going to end up being any comment on the shortcomings of psychology. We don't have time. History, poetry, philosophy, your mama, your aunts and uncles, you, historians. But over the fact that people are brought together with some kind of passion, and in other cases brought together by the genetic closeness of their blood relationship, and then they are the most aggressive in many cases, but at least they are aggressive. Those who love one another, either through birth or through sexual or friendly attraction, whatever it is chemically that draws people together, but down to the point of lovers. To varying degrees, it has been noted that all lovers, to varying degrees, are in some ways star-crossed. That is, they end up, right after a good hug and embrace, of this kind of thing in the face. And it just seems to belie all common sense. I don't guess I should go any further. I satisfactorily expressed it, as far as I'm concerned, to say that psychology is absolutely mystified. How can you explain lovers, and even kin, but lovers being aggressive? It's just the rule. There's just hardly an exception. The exceptions are not even worth talking about. Aggressive toward one another. What cannot be perceived is that this kind of aggression, from a more complex view, is actually friendly action toward the beloved. This is, if you can see it, a extremely more extreme example than the ones I was using regarding this the last time we were taping. Because as far as the sensual, the visual level of human behavior, this is getting right to it. And you can expand it all the way from individuals of a man and a woman, let us say. That's the classic love affair. All the way from that to large groups of people, which is not that much of a difference. But it is just mystifying. And then to ordinary people, it doesn't have to be in the academic world, an area of psychology, but ordinary people find it to be just staggering. Sometimes even within themselves, that I love so-and-so so much, and at times I can just be thinking great poetic thoughts of her or him, and suddenly I turn around and there, for the 4 billionth time, is the top off the toothpaste rolled down into the sink. And I know it seems small and all that, but here I am, the mood, my feeling toward my beloved is suddenly one of, Jesus, Holy Mother. You know, what kind of zither breath would keep doing this forever and ever? There is no way that ordinary consciousness, ordinary intelligence is wired up to begin to see this. That it is indeed loving acts. Calling it aggression, calling it hostility, serves purposes on a secondary level for life's expansion. But to call something aggressive, and for you to take it as such, and for the whole world, let us say, to agree that, all right, if you call somebody zither breath, that is an aggressive act. I don't care how it's done. So let's assume that we held a quick head count in all of humanity, except, of course, obvious nuts and people with terminal zither breath, all say, yes, that is an aggressive act. I don't care if they call it that. They're supposed to. If they do, for you to accept the fact blindly and not think any further that, well, there's no doubt about it, that's an aggressive act. It doesn't mean anything. People have known what an aggressive act, they've identified that as long as humans have been thinking. Has it done them any good? Does ordinary people understand any more about it? No. Don't worry about pondering it. I'm not going to stop and sip coffee and say, think about it. Damn, you've had 6,000 years to think about it at least. No, the answer is no. So just saying, well, that's an aggressive act, now we've got to analyze it and figure out how. You have taken the first story. You have taken the first sentence. You have taken that which you were supposed to of saying an insult, calling somebody a name. It doesn't have to be as questionable, I guess, as accusing somebody of being zither breath, but to call somebody an illegitimate child, to curse someone's ancestors. If all of humanity says that's a hostile act, that's an aggressive act, then they're supposed to. But for you to think, well, all right, there's the first sentence. We've established that. Of course, I knew that. To question someone's legitimacy is an aggressive act. Now we can go in and try to analyze why the person did it, what motivated them, and blah, 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 blah. But if you're going to try and do this sort of activity, you have got to think beyond the point that's necessary. You've got to think continually when you don't need to. And here is a prime example. Saying that something, the whole world saying that something, which is life saying it through man, that this is aggression, that tells you nothing. Now perhaps I should go back and revise kind of a crude story that I pulled on some of you years, a good while back, about a spirit, a force, like a cosmic little joker that had some kind of power around the general area in our solar system, around terra firma, that for some reason, I can't remember what reason I made up now, decided that he was going to turn things upside down. So a lot of, in general, the story was that now people think that wet is actually dry, and people think that up is down. That story needs revision. It needs expansion now, or at least I hope it does with you people. I mean, if any of you are still listening to that and go, oh yeah, oh, listen, that story changed my life, I live by that story. You ain't living much. The story actually needs to be expanded a little bit right quickly to this level, that there is still some useful validity to that kind of allegory, but it would be that things have been reversed to those of 3D sight, because that is certainly not the answer. That is certainly not anything resembling a infinite explanation. It is at the 3D level, you continually should be able to see that if all I had was 3D sight, if all I had was the intelligence endogenous to an earthbound creature, then indeed I can look around and see that that which is called up is just as well could be called down, and that called cold could just as well be called hot. Not allegorically, literally. And here is a prime example again. To say, well, this is an aggressive act. People continually not only beat up on one another, lovers and family, and kill one another, but somewhere this side of that kind of extreme overt action, they are continually being aggressive to one another, picking on one another, harassing one another, bumping, bruising one another psychologically, and all those descriptions. How can it be? People are just mystified. You would not be mystified if you could forget all of the obvious truth of these acts being aggressive and think, wait a minute, I can see instead of calling them aggressive and negative acts one toward another, they're acts of kindness. They are loving moves that one person is making toward another, because that is just as well what it is. And I don't mean just as well allegorically, metaphorically, trophically, or any other ly word. Just as well. It is just as valid. And since you have been seeing it from ordinary eyes all this time, it is indeed temporarily even more valid, because it is closer to, vis-a-vis your old ideas, everyone's ideas about aggression being aggression. It is closer to being a loving act. It is, from a 3D view, closer to its being reversed, because there is an absolute union of this. There is a dance, and it's not one person. It's not your three-dimensional Apache dance. It is not one person throwing another one around by the hair and wiping the floor up with them and jerking them back and forth. It is not that. Now, it appears to be that way. There's no doubt about that. Your eyes, that is, your three-dimensional intelligence, is not deluding you to see that kind of dance, allegorically and otherwise. To see people pushing each other around. To see in every relationship there being a dominant and a submissive aspect to it, which again are just two words. You're not in error to see that, but then you will never see any more unless you can think past that. And to see that, calling it aggression, or saying that one person is dominant and the other one's submissive, one person pushing the other one around and controlling the other person, if you stop there, it explains nothing. Now, if you're ordinary, you may think for a fleeting second, for an intellectual hobby, you may want to pat yourself on the back of the brain. So I'm getting pretty good. I don't just look at things and think, what a shame that he's pushing her around, especially when I don't have any particular interest in the matter. Now I begin to think, wait a minute, this is a psychological kind of fencing match going on. There are other forces at work. I've been around. I've read books on psychology. But beyond that, all you got to do is think 1 meter, even a millimeter beyond that. And it makes no sense. That is, it answers nothing. You have to see that there is a union. You have to see that the dance really has no identifiable, not in any useful manner, no identifiable pusher and pushee. It is not one person being aggressive toward another. Contraire, a better view of it, even at the 3D level, is that it is moves of friendship. It even gets to this level. It is not recognized as such, and it is not unconscious. It just cannot be seen. Those of you getting this on tape at other times and other places of me saying it's not unconscious, it's not within the realm as ordinary psychology would have it, because it is tied up with the same kind of mad running dichotomous forces that try and explain everything as either being this or that, when if it was either this or that, then everybody, at least half the world, by now would have everything figured out, right? Because if it's got to be either this or that, then half the people saying it's this and half the people saying it's that. Of course, now I think about it, maybe the only thing you're lacking, maybe you shouldn't even be fooling around with all this. Just leave the camp where you are and step across the street and join the other camp, and that may explain it all. Then I can go home early. If I had a home and knew what early was. To a more specific view, even the person who would seem to be the pushy, the one that the love that would seem to be the object of the aggression, you could see it. When I say it's not unconscious, it's not in the ordinary realm that these people are doing things being driven by some sort of acquired motivations from childhood or from very unpleasant experiences that cause them to now operate in ways that they had to sublimate to their normal level of consciousness. It's not that. It's that nobody understands what's going on at that level. There are no three-dimensional packets, systems of information and belief, not even any suspicions strong enough to carry individuals, ordinary individuals, forward. It is not that these people involved are just being driven by unconscious psychological forces. It is simply that at that level, no one's ordinary intelligence can perceive what's going on. It is, again, a piece of my creature outside the planet with more legs, being at least, you should live so long, I hope, to understand you don't even have to worry about an omnipus instead of an octopus. How about just a quintupus? Because it's got at least, you should live so long, I hope, to see that there are 5 legs, because you've got to see that there are 5 dimensions going on. Forget mathematical theories. You've got to see that there are 5 dimensions going on here to actually get out of this world the right way. Don't worry you, but to get out the right door right before you die at least. I shouldn't hold out that kind of cheap hope. I sound like a priest. Right before you die, at least I hope you get a flash that, my God, there are 5 dimensions. And of course, right after that, you should realize dimensions, that doesn't explain anything. But they are, hence me saying, if you seems too entangled to deal with the picture of an omnipus, at least a quintupus. But anyway, with the 3 visible arms holding into this planet, grasping the planet and everything on it, to wit, you and human intelligence. So back to what I was about to point out. It is not even the pusher, the aggressor, being driven by some force to aggress against the loved one in such a way as to make themselves feel better. You can look at it, if you can see it, that it is an attempt by the aggressor. I'm just still using the kind of words that ordinary people would use. That somebody, one person, insulting their partner, their loved one, being insulting, aggressive. But you can see it, if you begin to see it, as even the so-called and apparent aggressor attempting to compensate in the beloved for the beloved's own perceptions of their unfinished condition, their uncertainties, their instability, their general flawed nature as they perceive it. Not the aggressor being driven by some sort of criticism. Even, this does not belie that the aggressor is the one who may be overtly saying, boy, are you a dumbass? Or you're driving me nuts, you're so stupid. You have such unreasonable ideas about your own capacities that it's staggering that you could be that blind. Now that, of course, sounds like, without any doubt, to say the obvious, that sounds like the 3-dimensional electromagnetic area wherein you see, hear, touch, taste, and blah, blah, blah. That, yes, I heard those words, and that person who said that to the other one is certainly being aggressive and obviously critical. Does that explain anything? Has that ever helped anyone to be able to say, well, that's what they're doing? I mean, anybody knows that. Has that helped? Has it helped for someone to go to school for 10, 12 years studying psychology or psychiatry and have a beard and some gray hair and say the same thing, but now say it and a diploma on the wall? Well, that's obviously criticism. This person is critical of the beloved. I have a doctor's degree, and that is my professional opinion. Does it help? Not unless you're ordinary, and then of course it doesn't help anyway, but you don't know it. But does it help people like you? And of course I don't mean you to help you be more or less uncritical. Does it help you understand anything? Don't worry, I'm not going to say think about it, I'll answer for you again. No. We are deeply, if I need point out, into the realm of the totally irrational. Because this can be seen as not the aggressor, the one making the insults, apparently, obviously, is not some form of criticism, which is, we're talking about energy flowing from one person to another for life's own needs. It can be seen as being an attempt by the aggressor, that is the critical one, to compensate for the beloved's own self-criticism, which is still just a word, but for their own criticism of how insecure, how unfinished, how flawed, how lacking, how unstable they think they are. Anybody ever wants to remember, if you ever needed an example of blatant irrationality, I submit that's it. It took a lot of thought on my part to come up with such a splendid example. No, it didn't. But if you don't have a degree behind you, you try to compensate. You try to sound forceful and sound like you know what you're talking about. Don't you? May I try and turn your attention back to where they started tonight? If you can get a glimpse of this, not only is it useful and begins to take you past one of the initial areas of first stories that all of humanity is supposed to accept, but again, you should find it to be startling, the reality of it, that which without any doubt is an aggressive act. And we can talk about, I can start talking about all kinds of weird science fiction and spooky or made up stuff that I can come up with. But by God, come back down to earth sometime. If somebody is being insulting to somebody else, they're being critical. I mean, what's there to talk about? We can start talking about the subconscious, the unconscious, or even the conscious motivations to cause this to happen, the complex interpersonal relationships. But what's there to talk about? An insult's an insult. Criticism's criticism, whether it be just or unjust, whether it be called for or not. But what if you can begin to see that it is as likely, it is as valid. Now remember this is the hamburger heifer time just to get you going, because it's beyond that. It's too late, but if you've got to jump on board there, that it is just as valid. It is more explanatory to begin to see that this is not a critical act. This is not an act of aggression. It is one person. Remember, this is a childish beginning. But even it is startling to see it. That it is this one person attempting to compensate for the other person having such a bad feelings about themselves. That they're such a critic of themselves that the person being insulting and being critical is attempting to compensate for it. And any ordinary intelligence that might be within the sound of my voice goes, give me a bloody break. It can't be. Oh yeah. Even if I could grab somebody's ordinary intelligence that might be hearing that wanted to holler, give me a friggin' break from it, and I said, oh wait. Just theoretically, you can hear the words. The words make sense. That is, their serial, the sentence is rhetorically legitimate. Yeah, I heard it. Think about it just a second. Now, you agree. I'll agree with you. It can't be true. I mean, you should give me a break. It's just insane. But wait just a minute. What if? Let's just play. What if? If Einstein could do it, maybe you could do it for a second. Just what if it was true? Wouldn't that explain a lot? Maybe not an acre, but a lot. And I suggest if ordinary intelligence could be extraordinary for a second, even ordinary intelligence would go, wow, you're right. Then it'd have to let go of it. That if that which is so obvious, such as aggression, one person for another, loved ones, family, and it's just inexplicable. Unless you're just going to lapse back on good old first stories about, well, the gods are punishing us, or if the gods are not punishing me, we're punishing each other unconsciously for things that happen to us that we can't remember, that we just can't face up to. All of it is taking this first story that, well, we can't know. It's too complex. Or else we can know that God said this is the way it is and you got to suffer through it. So. But what if, just theoretically, I could ask ordinary intelligence again, what if what I'm describing is insane and as impossible as it obviously is, that acts of aggression are actually acts of what you think of as being love? That it is a friendly action, one person to another. they are attempting to compensate. That the act of obvious aggression, of criticism, one person for another, is the critic, in a sense. Listen right quick. I'd be telling ordinary touch. It's the critic seeing that the beloved is so critical of her or himself that I'm going to help compensate. I'm going to help out. Yeah, well, that'd be nice. And how'd you say they did it? By being critical, by being aggressive. All right, now's the time. I'll take a sip, and I'm going to tell you, think about it a second. It is so subtle, it is so much in the crack, that too many of you, I feel, are still not just seeing it head on, at least for a second. Someone being critical of another person. Now we're talking about, in the general flow of life, just the ordinary sense of being critical. Now if somebody, don't look for some spurious pimple that just pops up of one person being critical of somebody and they don't even hear it. I'm talking about when it takes two to be critical. That somebody's got to be critical to somebody else and the other person hear it and react to it. In other words, life needed energy to flow down this particular line for a second from this person to another. So one person is critical, the other person, let's don't play with words, the other person takes it personally. The other person finds it to be negative. The other person wishes you hadn't done it. It is not a positive act. Think about it though. As far as the situation was concerned, the critic found fault with the one he's criticizing. Now, forget any ideas about whether it's justified. The critic's perception was, it could be pretty vague, like, boy, you're stupid. But if you think about it a second enough, it is specific enough to press on and think about. And if you really wanted to push it, which is no consequence, at any particular time that this critic is telling this person that they're stupid, then you could find what appeared to be some stimuli, some specific situation, some occurrence that seemed to trigger it. But the person is saying, they're sending out energy, and it comes in the words of saying, God, are you stupid? Now it sounds just as aggressive, as critical, as negative, but look at it. If you can take away ordinary intelligence's reaction to these words and its acceptance of reality being in a certain mode that everybody understands, ha ha. The critic, from another quite valid view, is attempting to compensate for the person in their perception being stupid. And how do they do it? By saying, God, are you stupid? It is like the other person over here, you see them, let's say that you're going to be the critic, and this other person, let's say they're a pie. We can play secondary school, can't win, draw. Let's see, over here is the critical person, and over here is the beloved. In the pie, the critic looks over and says, boy, are you stupid. Now, whatever it is that they're meaning to say, boy, are you stupid, as far as they're concerned, and their view local is as valid as anybody, so let's don't even stop there. To say, boy, are you stupid, is to say there's something missing. So for them to say, boy, are you stupid, amounts to what, as far as they're concerned? It amounts to them trying to send this. But has anybody ever seen this? You don't have to think about it. The answer is, you're not supposed to. But rather than, as I went ahead and spoke for ordinary intelligence a few minutes ago, rather than just dismissing it out of hand because I told you before you could tell you, or I tried to, that, boy, is this an example of outright insanity, irrationality? But is it? Life is dressed in such a way, the intellectual activities of man, especially, we're referring to now in conversation and talk, which is a specific, definite, inescapable, irreplaceable transfer of energy in life's body. It has called certain things by names for reasons of its own, and it says this is criticism. It's a negative act. It is an aggressive act. But look at it. To insult somebody, to criticize somebody, in another quite valid, though irrational view, though absolutely extraterrestrial view, it is an attempt to compensate. It is a friendly act to say, God, are you stupid? Now, for you people on tape, some of the time, some of the place, I certainly do not mean in any sense of the word, the ordinary sense of the word, that it's a friendly act. I mean, don't start thinking I'm talking in some kind of mystical language, because ordinary people will never see it as being a friendly act, because friendly act is no more a valid universal description than to call it an act of aggression. But as opposed to it simply being an obvious accepted act of aggression and being a critical act, that being a hostile move from the critic to the beloved, can you see life attempting to move energy from one place to another? And if you want to talk about efficiency, by God, there it is. And if you doubt that for a second, what seems to be the prevailing, if we had to divide into camps on this planet between aggression and love, what seems to be the ruling camp? Huh? The latter. And of course, life also makes men bemoan the fact, wring their hands about the history of bloodshed and hostility, all the way from nations down to individuals, of family members killing one another, of lovers no sooner getting through doing it and having just part of a cigarette, and one of them says, God damn, you burnt the sheets again, and stabs the person. Oh. Well, you all know it is historically, it is individually, if you are left to your own three-dimensional earthbound nervous system devices, any idea as to whether the good guys or the bad guys are winning. The good forces, the positive forces, the helpful forces, or the disruptive forces, the critical forces, the aggressive forces. If there's any doubt who's winning, just go look at the headlines, turn on the news, tune in your own brain, and it sees the new headlines. If the greenhouse effect don't kill us, nuclear warfare will come back in vogue and do so. And you think, yeah, sure will. There you are. Where? Oh. I was afraid you're over here. And that seems to be explanatory. It seems to be rational on its surface. But can you see, a bunch of you did a few minutes ago, it is just as valid. I'll say again, this is not allegorical. Other than the fact that all talk is allegorical, that all talk is secondary, that all talk is reflective of something else, that all talk is outer garments. And somewhere under there is people's underwear. But the underwear is what three-dimensional talk, three-dimensional intelligence cannot see. That is, the energy behind it. The purposes going on that are not psychological, not unconscious. They're simply extraterrestrial. They're outside the limits of 3D intelligence. They're outside of any dichotomous dance. So I say it's just as valid. That's not the end of it. Don't just stop and say, you're right. Figuratively speaking, now that I follow some of your examples, and once you get us in the room and you put those drugs in the air conditioner like I do every time we tape, and it gets you dizzy, then you can say, yeah, all right, you say it's just as valid to call this a helpful act. Yeah, it's just as valid if you don't put it that way. Don't stop there. It's not just as valid. I'm just trying to get you going. It is closer. It's not the answer, but it is closer. But at least you should be able to see without any doubt, as absolutely irrational and insane and incorrect as this is, that it is just as valid to see criticism of God, are you stupid, is an attempt for the critic, the aggressor, to help compensate for the perceived stupidity. If you were not trying to help, would you say you're stupid? If somebody was standing up on the edge of a cliff and they were beginning to tilt out too far, and you liked the person, maybe it was your mama, your wife, and you said, hey, You're about to fall. Don't be so stupid. I told you not to be clumsy. You're going to fall off. Is that not an act of friendship to point it out? And do you really think, and now that you can see that for a moment at least, that all forms of criticism, all forms of what seems to be without any doubt aggression, can also be seen as being friendly moves? Of course, then, to get past, as I said, that, you have got to see that these relationships, of course all of human life, but even these individual relationships, are not simply for the benefit of those involved in the relationship, those two people. You got to remember, we're all working. And I don't mean for IBM and General Motors. I know they may send you your check, but everybody's working for the same employer. This particular employer is just able to hide in such a way that makes strings of offshore dummy corporations. I mean, most people can't trace where this goes. But everybody's working for the same employer. So all of this is not simply for the benefit, nor were it to the detriment. If it were true that criticism and aggression is some sort of negative act, even that, if it were true, is not for the detriment of the people involved. You have got to have a very teensy-weensy trial-size intelligence to believe that you're out dancing. That is, your relationship with life, your relationship with other people, individuals, and with life, that you believe that you're out there dancing on this dance floor, that you're here for some reason having to do intrinsically, per se, with you, like life, planet Earth, and God forbid you should look out or just be temporarily aware that the universe is a real big spatial place. It even gets into temporal space. That you believe that you and your little affairs, not your big affairs, take away the adjective, you and your life, you and your affairs, all the heartbreaks, the traumas, the fears, the few triumphs you've had, that all of this, if you out there on the dance floor with a partner here, a partner there, a family, lovers, children, life, your job, and that you're out there dancing, and your particular dance is of some specific. I don't mean that you're of no consequence, but that your dance, your relationships, your criticism of others, the unjust criticism that others and life has of you, that this, specifically you and your relationships, and fill in over here, you're holding, at times it appears to be your mama, your lover, your husband, your job, your children, your memories, whatever it is. If you think this is in some way significant, not that you're not, but that you think that your dance, that is the relationship between you and whatever it is you're dancing with, that within itself is significant, you're a much better person. I feel humbled to be in your presence. I'm completely unworthy to say anything else, and I'll pause a second, and all those who fit that definition, if I wasn't wired with a mic, I'd go open the door and show you out and beg your forgiveness for having wasted your time. Of course, every now and then, few people suspect that, but most people suspect it are wired up to go from that to wringing their hands and going, woe is me, I'm no good, and playing critic to themselves. You've got to be able to have that kind of cold-blooded, and I won't say that French term again because it always makes my nose hurt. Let's just stick with cold-blooded. You know the words, the term, the SF term. Maybe that's what happens if you're not French and you try to say things like "sang," it makes your nose tickle, and it just shows the paucity of Gaelic blood in one. You have got to be able to realize in some kind of what would really be a more objective, which would be a more complex, which would be that more freed from 3D limits, an awareness that this is going on, as interesting or as disinteresting or as abrasive as your individual life may feel if you're looking at it from an ordinary view, but to still understand that this dance that I'm doing, to look at this dance is not going to get you anywhere. To look up on the wall and get so smart to say, hey, Plato was right. It's not just the shadows, we're here. To take your dance as being, in some way, not simply worthy of some investigation or analyzation, but to continue as life would have it, through most humans, that there is some satisfactory answer here. If you could stop for a second and say, who in the hell built this dance floor? Where's the music coming from? All these other dancers, they're as involved, they're staggering around in the same kind of dream that I normally do. Who put the roof on this place? What's outside the door? You know, who's making a profit off this? Here I am dancing. I dance whether I want to or not. I dance when I'm cold. I dance when I'm sick. And I know those people are dancing up to the day they die. And they die and they just, take them out like cordwood. In some way, with no negative. The beginning of real new intelligence would be in some way with no criticism. You don't feel it's an insult. You don't feel that you have been aggrieved. You don't feel that the dancers, the dance hall, the music is aggressive toward you. But you've got to finally look around if you ever start being able to think. Not philosophically and not theoretically. I'm just putting it now in words, but it's the kind of thing to be able to look around and your perception of it is beyond 3D words. But as important as everybody's little teensy-weensy life is, and it is, what else could be important? What else you got, right? But there you are dancing, and sometimes you step on others' foot, and then they step on your foot, and then they insult you, and then you insult them, and then the other crowds, other dancers get too close to you, and then you hear the sound of somebody pulling a knife. You smell death. You smell success, but it's way across the dance floor and you can't get there. All of that. But finally look around that, yes, I know this is normally important. But you got to realize somebody built this dance hall. And they spent some big bucks. Because this dance hall is so big, it holds everybody. So we're talking big money. We're talking about more money than any of the people in there got. You know that. You got to consider, even when things are going good. Here I'm dancing, and how neat. In fact, I like the music they're playing, this dance. I like the company. Nobody's too close to me. Somebody built this. Somebody's turning a profit. This dance hall, I didn't build it. Nobody I know built it. Nobody I know knows why it's in operation. Why is the music always playing? Why is the temperature always tolerable? Something's going on. And inside the dance hall, that which seems to be aggressive acts, that which seems to be criticism, once you begin to see it, is no such thing. It's the sound of the dance hall getting bigger. The floor gets larger. Except you don't see somebody laying down parquet. You don't see the dance floor expanding out. What you see, what you hear, you think is the sounds of gunshots, warfare, switchblades being opened, insults, cries that we're destroying the dance hall, that the greenhouse effect's going to ruin the carpet in the dance hall and we'll all mire up in soggy carpets, or the parquet will all curl up and attack us. All the sounds that seem to be, to ordinary intelligence, that seem to be expressions of human aggression, stupidity. It's the sound, and not as Sam Cooke would have it, of men working on the chain gang, but it... Well, sometimes, not having a diploma, I do like to, I can't help it, I'll admit it. It's my ego. I'd like to drag in some of these philosophers to show you that I have read a book or so. It's the sound of the dance hall, the ballroom expanding. It's healthy. It would be literally as if, although I know it got a laugh, is the parquet begins to reproduce itself. The carpet, the tables, the dancers, the walls, it all continues to expand in all directions, but you don't hear the sound like a little nipper, if it would grow fast enough, of the bones cracking and popping and muscles stretching and getting bigger. You hear a little nipper screaming and crying. you hear what seems to be forms of criticism and aggression going on, and it's the sound of that ballroom expanding, which does not, still should not pacify your kind of inquiry. Your remembrance of that kind of nonverbal inquiry is to, somebody's making a profit off this. And they did not build this dance hall. It's just, there's no way to debate it, no way to argue it, talk about it. Whoever did it, whatever this business is, whatever the reason of this dance hall is, they did not build it, it's just obvious. They did not build it just for me. They didn't. I'm not sad about it, I'm not mad about it, I'm not upset, period, but now that I pull my eyes away from the immediate vicinity, from my immediate local dance, only a fool believes that. Only a fool would think that. Let me pick up something else from the last time we were taping. You recall, I pointed out that the intellect makes things bigger than they are. And don't let yourself snap back like a cheap brassiere and say that it makes things bigger than they were. It makes things bigger than they are. Now, we're already tonight in that great land of non-sequential thinking. So remember, it makes things bigger than they are, not than they were. Let me explode the sentence a little bit. The intellect makes secondary things bigger than they are. Now, the example I was using, that I started last time, you recall, people who had as a secondary interest, a hobby, going to the ballet, or listening to recorded music in the privacy and privacy of their own home. And then I point out how the intellect can go from that to, finally somebody comes up, well, why don't we put out a magazine about listening to records, or a magazine about the ballet, and see if people will not buy our magazine, subscribe to it, and we'll make a profit. It'll expand the economy. The ballroom gets larger, but it'll help our dance. We'll turn ourselves a few nice bucks of profit, because people, since we have so many people now interested in recorded music, somebody will buy a magazine about it. You have expanded through the intellect, non-sexually. You have reproduced, you have thrown out mutations of it. It is a kind of promising spore being thrown out to the wind inside the ballroom to take this secondary activity and make it bigger than it is. Not than it was, because it never did have any particular size, but bigger than it is. And that's about where I left off with the specific examples last time we were taping. I wanted to be sure that you could see the kind of collusion of non-seritum growth in the singular areas of humanity's activities. Such as the magazine. That would not be the end of it, unless life is just going to drop this whole line, which it obviously hasn't, because there's still recorded music and there's still magazines. But I just wanted you to see, if you didn't do it yourself, not only would there be a magazine about recorded music or ballet, let that get healthy enough to be surviving and a good subscription, good advertising base rate, and what will happen? Critics will pop up of the magazine, of the job they're doing, the areas they're not covering. Shortly after that will pop up what? Rival publications. That apparently this one magazine, it's not looked at this way, but this one magazine, this one activity that made something bigger than it is, this one magazine now reproduces itself with no sexual activity, and the original magazine, rather than it being able to see that it has reproduced itself by the rival publication now, it sees it as what? An act of aggression. We had the market on this. We thought of this, of putting out a magazine about recorded music. Doing good, about to make a fortune, and then what the hell happens? In fact, those guys used to work for us. They stole some of our ideas, and they left in the middle of the night. 2 months later, across town, they're going in competition. Is that an aggressive act or not? If that be true, then you would have to call, if you want to jump this back to a more primary level, then you would call every offspring an act of aggression. To reproduce yourself, you would have to see as a critical act. A little step further then. At least I got a few of you. It is only in these intellectual, secondary, singularly human affairs that drastic alterations, that mutations can take place intergenerationally. That's not in the dictionary, it should be. What I meant by that was to happen within one lifetime. Because at the primary level, to the dismay at times of paleontologists and biologists and adversaries of the good Baptist way of thinking, they can't spot actual primary evolution taking place in one lifetime. They can't hardly find it over thousands of years. Which makes, of course, all the Southern Baptists go, ha ha ha. Told you God created the heavens and the earth. Darwin didn't have anything to do with it. Probably drank on the side. At any rate, there is no way to see, because it doesn't happen in the three-dimensional sense, to see alterations in primary affairs in one lifetime, to say the least. But here is one of the importances of these singularly unique human affairs that I have been, for reasons of verbal fission, referring to as secondary. Listening to recorded music, playing music, everything that would not be, from a very primitive view, absolutely necessary for life. It is only in these secondary areas that life, through man, in one generation, in one lifetime, sometimes almost overnight, can make drastic alterations in secondary affairs. Because remember, I point out to you, secondary affairs, when I say that, to try and see where I was pointing originally with this verbally, that secondary affairs would be those kind of things that you didn't have to absolutely do to live individually, right? Such as you could say that I love recorded music. My biggest hobby, I spend more money buying new CDs and equipment. That's my only hobby. If your house burnt down, you lost all your CDs, you couldn't buy any more, we'll assume that you're sane enough that you would live. That if you never had any more, you went deaf, that you would still live. So we could say that what I'm referring to as secondary activities are that individually you don't actually have to have. But that doesn't mean that life doesn't have to have it. If life didn't have to have secondary affairs over the full spectrum of man, there wouldn't be such. Thusly, to call them secondary affairs on the larger scale of life is in no way to imply at all that they are options. They are as necessary now as primary. But in primary affairs on the 3D level, in one lifetime, in one generation, but in one absolute lifetime, life does not make drastic changes. It does not mutate one strand of life, one line of viable creatures in a generation. But it can take the secondary affairs and it can do it almost overnight. Lest you have any doubt as to the importance of my secondary affairs, your hobbies, life's, that is humans' hobbies. I was going to give you a Thanksgiving present, my annual one, but it looks like we're going to run out of time. So I guess we can do it Friday. And it'll be post-Thanksgiving. Anti-Thanksgiving. Well, with 4 minutes, as long as I'm here with life making things, that intellect making things bigger than they are, there is a civilized corollary that we're getting real close to the end, so I'm going to give you the warning in advance, you people out there. This is not a critique of some area of human behavior. I was going to point out another example that would seem to be something questionable, but it's to try and get you to see that the kind of things that you don't normally look at, even if I pointed it out in some way you normally looked at it for a second, that you ordinarily wouldn't, the first thing it would strike you if you're simply trying to look with ordinary intelligence is, oh, we're laughing at that, right? We're making fun of that. So that was the warning for the night. The civilized corollary I had in mind is how a person's intellectual reputation can, now we're talking about secondary affairs, how their intellectual reputation can be planted, nourished, and sustained by notations and revelations of what the person reads, listens to, looks at. Their reputation intellectually, and not on the basis of what they think or what they do. I thought more of you would immediately hear that. But now I guess you read it so often, you hear it so often, it just flies past you. But you can be reading about a famous musician in your magazine about recorded music, and you just don't notice it anymore. It is part of the general wiring of things that they'll be talking about the man, and they did an interview, and the first thing the writer who'll start saying was describing his apartment there on the Upper East Side and the many books he had, and he looked down, there was such and such books open. On the wall he had certain paintings by a certain up-and-coming artist. They point out all these things. They'll do it on the back of the dust covers of a book. They'll show the guy and they'll tell his wife and family, and then they'll say things such as, his current interest is in reading such and such. Nobody notices that this is a support of his intellectual reputation. In some cases, that's all they give is the kind of stuff he reads. And think, God, is that man a mental giant or not? Think about, we're talking about secondary affairs. We're talking about the intellect making something bigger than it was. They're making the man bigger than he is by saying, well, he reads Homer in the original Greek. He has read the full works without dying of ennui of Henry James, the boring versions. They literally, now we're not attacking humans now. Life is making people do this because it makes it grow. And I'm getting out of time, but you should hear this with no criticism. That it is accepted. You just never even heard it anymore. It's just taken as being proof. It's evidence of a man's intellect to tell you the kind of things he reads. Think about that. That's proof of his intellect. Not what he thinks. Or they give proof of his civilized taste. What a superior person is, the kind of paintings that he says he likes. Not paintings he painted, the kind of music. The kind of music that he likes. Not the kind of music he plays, not the kind of music he attempts to write. The intellect can make things bigger than they are to such a degree that you don't even notice it. They become this. All right, come back after Thanksgiving if you want to. And I'll give you that, my yearly gift. my forced present.